Plato's Republic. Look, it's one of the most important books ever. But let's be real, it can feel like a total beast to get through. So that's what we're going to do here. Break down its core ideas, figure out what the big deal is, and see why people are still arguing about it thousands of years later. Let's jump in.
Calling this book influential is kind of like calling the ocean damp. I mean, think about it. Cicero's work on the Roman state, St. Augustine's City of God, even Thomas More's Utopia. They're all basically sequels or responses to this one book. It's also seen as the first great book on education, something that shaped thinkers for literally centuries. It wasn't just a book, it was a blueprint.
So what's the secret sauce here? What could possibly be so radical, so profound, that it's still echoing in our heads after 2.5 millennia? That's the mystery we're going to try and unravel today.
All right, here's our game plan. We've seen its influence. Next, we'll dive into the search for justice. Then, we'll see how that leads to building a whole city out of ideas, check out the wild rules for its leaders, and finally, wrestle with the big question Plato left for us all.
So the whole thing kicks off with what sounds like a simple question. What is justice? Sounds easy enough, right? Wrong. The entire book is basically watching Socrates and his friends try, and mostly fail, to nail down a simple answer. The chat starts with this respectable old guy, Cephalus, and his answer is super straightforward, just good old-fashioned common sense. Justice is telling the truth and paying back what you owe. But Socrates, being Socrates, is like, hold on a second, what if a friend lends you a weapon and then he goes insane? Would it be just to give it back to him? Probably not. So much for that definition.
Okay, so his son, Polemarchus, jumps in with another classic definition. Justice means helping your friends and hurting your enemies. Makes sense, right? But Socrates pokes holes in that one too. How can you be sure who your real friends are? And more importantly, is it ever actually just to intentionally harm someone? You can kind of feel the frustration building. They're just going in circles.
And right then, a guy named Thrasymachus basically kicks down the door. He's a sophist, and he is done with all this polite philosophizing. He just roars out his own theory. And his take is, well, it's intense. He says, forget all this noble talk. Justice is just a fancy word for what the people in charge want. It's a con. Might is right. The rules are always rigged to help the powerful. Now, after Socrates ties Thrasymachus up in a bunch of logical knots, the group is still totally stuck. The problem is, trying to see justice inside a single person is just too difficult. It's too small and murky. So Socrates pulls off this amazing move. He's like, okay, new plan. Let's zoom out. Way out.
His analogy is brilliant, really. He says trying to understand justice in one person is like trying to read tiny little letters from across a room. It's basically impossible. But what if those same letters were written huge on a giant billboard? You could read them easily. The state, he argues, is the person writ large. It's the billboard for the soul. If they can just design a perfectly just city, then they can look at their creation and finally see what justice really is.
And so the thought experiment begins. They literally build a city with words. First up, the healthy state, which is super basic, just food, shelter, farmers, and builders. But one of the guys, Glaucon, complains that this is a city of pigs. He wants art and comfort and luxury. So Socrates agrees, they add all that stuff in, but he warns them. This luxurious state will get feverish. It'll lead to greed and conflict and war. And now this city is going to need an army.
Okay, buckle up, because this is where the Republic gets really famous and really, really weird. To have a just city, you need just rulers, a special class Plato calls the guardians. But to stop them from becoming the corrupt tyrants that Thrasymachus was talking about, their whole world has to be completely rebuilt from the ground up.
So what does it take to be a guardian? Well, Plato says they need this weird mix of qualities. They have to be like a well-bred guard dog, vicious to enemies, but gentle and protective of their own citizens. They have to be strong and fast. But here's the kicker. To balance that warrior spirit, they need something else. They need a love of wisdom. In fact, the true rulers must be philosophers.
And to make sure they stay pure, you take away everything that could possibly corrupt them. I mean, everything. No private property, no land, no fancy houses, no money. They're even forbidden to touch gold or silver. They eat all their meals together in a common hall. Because, as Plato argues, the second these guardians start caring about their bank accounts, they stop being guardians and start being tyrant.
So you're probably thinking, okay, how on earth do you get a whole country to agree to this? It's a fair question, and Plato's answer is a doozy.
He says you need to tell them what he himself calls a magnificent lie. It's a foundational story, a myth you tell every citizen from birth to make sure everyone accepts their role and the whole system holds together.
And here's the story they'd tell every kid. It goes like this. You are all brothers and sisters, born from the very earth of this city. But when the gods were making you, they mixed different metals into your souls. The ones with gold in their souls are meant to rule. The ones with silver are made to be soldiers, the auxiliaries. And those with brass and iron are born to be farmers and craftsmen.
But now, hold on, because here's the really crucial twist. The part that makes this whole thing kinda surprising. The metals aren't inherited. A golden couple can have a silver kid, and a child from a brass family can be born with a soul of pure gold. And if that happens, the state's #1 job is to identify that child and move them to their proper rank. It's a system based on your nature, not your parents.
So, after this absolutely wild journey, from a simple question in a living room all the way to a perfectly engineered society run by philosophers, we have to take a step back and ask, what was the point of all this?
We have to remember how this all started. This giant, sprawling, radical city wasn't actually the point. It was just a tool. It was a massive magnifying glass, an elaborate thought experiment built for one reason and one reason only. So Socrates could finally point to it and say, see, that's justice. It's a perfect harmony, where every part does its job for the good of the whole. And if that's what it looks like in a city, that must be what it looks like in a person too. So why on earth are we still talking about this 2,400 years later? Because when you hold Plato's city up like a mirror to our own world, the reflection is, well, it's pretty jarring. He wanted rulers who despised power. We often get career politicians who crave it. He argued for strict censorship for the sake of social stability. We champion free speech, no matter how messy it gets. He thought a state needed a unifying, noble lie to survive. We claim our societies are built on transparent truth. It forces you to ask some really tough questions about the things we value.
And that leads us to the final, haunting question that the book leaves you with. Is this perfectly organized, rational state a blueprint for utopia, a dream of a better world? Or is it a terrifying warning about tyranny, a society that sacrifices freedom, art, and even family, all for the sake of perfect order? Plato wanted to find justice, but what he left us with is a profound and deeply unsettling question about the price of a perfect world, and whether it's a price we're willing to pay.